Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see the results of a bold experiment. Our exploration into the effect of environment upon intelligence was, alas, a complete failure. Self-confidence instilled by a placebo intelligence pill and consistently reinforced by my assistant Tangsi did not, in fact, make the test subject smarter. It did, however, yield fascinating results.
What is the point of this stupid dumbass experiment anyway?
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. I am Andy. That's my name. And I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony. Always a fan of a fun little home experiment, Maddox.
Love to do a little experiment. I feel like that's underappreciated. People have questions. They're like, how could I ever know this? And it's like, you could just try it.
Just try it.
Try it both ways.
I feel like it's important in the kitchen especially. If you learn to cook from just reading from detailed recipes, you might think that like erring or like, changing the plan from the recipe might like result in ruined food. And I think it's important just to like try stuff and see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I even feel like I know I can do a much better job at this. Like, I get frustrated. It's like, I can't find a recipe that just has the salt percentage for this particular pickle. And it's like, how long would it actually take me to just set up 3 jars and do, 5, 10, 15?
Pickling is a bad example because it would take months.
Well, sure. But you know what I'm saying. Or like, how much salt do I need in this broth? And I could just do a little test and do it side by side. Maybe it takes me half an hour, and then I could write that down in my copybook and just know that for the future. But it's hard to think in that way sometimes.
We're doing a little experiment at Cube Night tonight, which I think will be kind of interesting. You and I both have medium power level cubes. Your regular cube, which is, of course,
completely regular power level.
Normal, regular power level, just like the normal kind of regular power level everyone's used to.
As we have explored in recent episodes, just exactly what people expect.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, it's like you often refer to it as a master set power level or similar. It's a cube that eschews most of the iconic powerful cards people might know from Cube in favor of just like limited all-stars and like playing some like good, clean Magic. And then I have my younger Sacred Geometry cube, which is largely inspired by the regular cube. I think when I designed it, I was like, I'm just stealing Anthony's idea, but I'm going to put Counterspell and Lightning Bolt in it.
Fixing it.
No, I'm not fixing anything. I just had a different vision of a broader power level band and a greater focus on just clean, iconic cards and not caring so much about if something was too good, basically, for the cube. But overall, I think these cubes are roughly similar power level, and we're doing a little experiment tonight at Cube Night. We're going to draft each of these cubes with 8 full players, and then we're going to play all of our matches across pod.
It's interesting you say you think that they are very similar power level, because I feel like Sacred Geometry is much, much, much more powerful.
You think much, much, much.
There's like some obvious power outliers, and as you said, like you're willing to just play Demonic Tutor because it's a very clean, iconic card. Like power level is not your main focus in this cube. It's really just about sort of that like card design quality, card design aesthetics. So there's obviously some outliers at that end where I think regular cube is much more narrow. Like the best card in a pack versus the worst card isn't all that different.
You don't have a lot of stinkers. I do have some stinkers.
Okay, what are the stinkers? Give me an example.
Volshock Morningstar.
Yeah, okay.
Honor.
That's not a great card.
Yeah, it's not a good card.
But in the right context, it can be pretty good. The other limitation is you restrict the tokens pretty strictly here. So that's another, and that kind of like aesthetic thing. There are maybe some cards that I have that are just like a little clunkier in terms of the design, but like they fit in that narrow power band. So I don't know. I feel like there are going to be plenty of decks that are just going to run up against, is Archangel of Thune still in there and Hero of Bladehold? Like, is there enough big removal to deal with those kinds of outliers?
I think it's one of the big questions is how is the removal going to line up across pod? Because you say you're worried about that. I'm worried about Traxos. I just don't know how many removal spells I have for Traxos. I think Traxos is going to maybe just run roughshod all over Sacred Geometry.
Point. Okay, well, I know what I'm going to try and draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be good. I think there's differences between these cubes. Overall, I do think they're actually really close in power level. And part of this experiment is, I think, how big is the power level delta? Because I think I would agree with you. I think on average, Sacred Geometry decks are probably a little better than regular cube decks. Now, we're using relative terms. You say quite a bit more powerful. I'm saying a little better. What does that mean in terms of win percentage? Like, let's put some numbers on it. What do you expect at the end of the night? The match win count, well, let's do it by percentage. Who knows how many matches we're going to get in, but what percentage of matches do you expect to be won by Sacred Geometry cube decks versus regular cube decks?
I expect regular cube decks to win 20 to 25% of the time.
Wow. I'm putting it more like 60-40, Sacred Geometry to regular cube. And it's worth noting, part of this experiment is we can't match people up based on ranking, or like, not ranking, what's the word? Record, because that only works if in every single round, an equal number of regular cube decks and sacred geometry decks win, which will likely not be true. It's very unlikely we'll split it directly down the middle. So pairing is going to be a little funky. We'll have to get a little creative with it. Someone suggested maybe we try Parker's best of 2 for the evening, which I don't like changing multiple variables, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I would rather not have a bunch of draws, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the experiment of figuring out how this works. But I think part of this is all right, what is the actual power level disparity and how much is that made up for just by you had a mulligan or, the regular variants of Magic. I think part of the experiment is how will removal line up. And then also, I think one of the biggest differences is the regular cube is a much more synergistic cube. It's not a synergy cube. When I hear synergy cube, I think of cubes where there's tons of onboard complexity and every card has 2 triggered abilities and triggers off of other cards, and there's a lot of beep booping around and taking a bunch of chaining game actions. And that's not really how the regular cube works, but there is, I think, a lot more cards caring about what other cards are doing mechanically in a way that matters, whereas Sacred Geometry Cube is really just aggro, mid-range, and control, and very little beyond that.
Sure. I mean, like you mentioned, Traxos is sort of a draw into an artifact themed deck, and that does come together. There is a synergistic artifact deck. It doesn't look the same every time because sometimes it'll be blue-red, sometimes it'll be black-blue, or splashing for some other color. There's a little bit of artifact stuff in white that sometimes comes together. So it's not, a synergistic cube in that sense of every 2-color pair has this really specific synergistic archetype, but there are certain themes that do come together pretty strongly. I can see that argument.
I also think the other elephant in the room is that how many cards are in the regular cube right now?
452.
So it might just not open Traxos, whereas all of my cubes basically are always exactly sized for an 8-person pod. So in this case, 360 cards.
I do have to disclose a few minor changes. The cube is now drafted with 17 cards. I added a bunch of conspiracies. Just thought, total coincidence. I just decided to make these updates.
You could do 16 card packs for a regular cube if you wanted to. That would take you to 388. And make the decks a little better if you're worried about...
I'm not worried, and I agree with you that changing one variable at a time is what we should be doing here.
Well, it's funny because we say changing one variable at a time, but this is not... This is purely, I think, as a curiosity quencher.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a great point. So
this is not a thing we're going to do ongoing. So it's not like we have to do it so that next time we do this we can have learned what I think we're going to learn abstract things about cube design and card evaluation and power level that are not necessarily going to apply to the next time you do this. Because why would you ever do this again?
Yeah, I don't know. Why are we doing it for the first time? just to see. I think we are going to learn stuff we didn't know to ask questions about.
Yeah, I think it's going to shine a light on some aspects of the sort of subtle differences in these cubes' design that will maybe help us clarify and understand them better. And yeah, I think interesting conversations about removal suites and synergy versus raw power level and how bad do power outliers feel? Do they feel worse when you're in the regular cube and you know that you didn't even draft in the cube where you had the opportunity to open Demonic Tutor or Lightning Bolt? Is that going to feel worse, or is it going to be actually that Lightning Bolt just plays exactly the same as whatever Lightning Strike you're playing? Functionally, in all the way the matches played out, it could have been a Lightning Strike and nothing would have changed, materially based on this one anecdotal draft. Who knows?
It's a very funny exercise because such a huge part of the conceit of Cube,
this is funny.
At least for me, is just the power level doesn't really matter because it's a closed system. So everybody has equal opportunity to have access to every card. So you can kind of do whatever you want. Sure, a wider range is going to play differently. There's going to be ramifications, but it's still going to be functional in a certain sense because everybody's within that same sandbox.
And draft is self-correcting and all the stuff we always talk about, self-balancing.
But here we're just putting the 2 sandboxes next to each other and seeing which one wins as sandboxes,
And I'll
work.
say, I'm a little less interested in just which one wins and more interested in what was the gameplay experience like? What did people feel in each of their respective matches mattered, and was it different than what feels to matter in a regular Sacred Geometry draft or regular cube draft? Did different things matter in the games than would otherwise come up? Yeah,
that's a really good question. Thinking about this murder isn't that great in regular cube usually, but there's just bigger threats like the aforementioned Hero Bladehold. That murder actually is maybe going to be a much better card in this matchup than it is in a normal regular cube draft. Some other logistical questions. I feel like maybe this is assumed. Are we each drafting in our own cube pods?
I don't have a preference. I know both these cubes really well. I'll draft in mine. I'll draft in yours. I don't care.
And the rest of the players are just going to be players from our local cube night.
Yep, whoever's down for this funky little experiment.
And I guess we're just, like you said, we can't do perfect matchup pairings. Is it just going to be kind of random, or do you still want to try and match up based on record as much as possible?
I think we should just kind of have it be more or less random.
Or we can do the total anarchy thing, like whichever two pods
I think it should be
second.
rolling. I think it should be rolling matches, basically. So if you're done, if it's someone that you haven't played, just play them and start going and try to get in at least 3 rounds is my vague plan.
I look forward to seeing how it goes.
And you get to find out how it goes right now, thanks to the power of editing.
This is Derek. I was a player in the Sacred Geometry Regular Cube Cross-Pod Experiment. I drafted Demure Control in Sacred Geometry and had an overall record of 3-1. The games were fun. I'm trying to navigate matches until I could activate my inevitability engines in the form of Tallarans, Crawling Barons, and Consecrated Sphinx was always engaging, for me, anyway. Sorry to my opponent. Speaking of which, I played against Michael, Emma, Nikki, and Perry, and only lost against Perry. My opponents, I feel, on the regular cube side of things, were building more synergistic decks than what I had brought to the table. But the quality of cards that I was presenting were extremely efficient at disrupting their game plans, so I was usually able to gain the edge and stabilize.
Can I tell you the arc of my emotional experience during this experiment, Anthony?
Please do.
I was drafting Sacred Geometry. You were drafting Regular Cube. We ended up having a total of 18 people in these 2 pods. You can support more than 8 in Regular Cube. So you had a couple extra drafters floating around who played each other in some matches when they were not facing cross-pod opponents. I drafted what I thought was a pretty good control deck in Sacred Geometry, like an Esper control deck. And then my first match, I just absolutely smoked my opponent. Like, was not close to being close. And they didn't, like, mulligan, stumble on mana. Like, they cast their spells, I cast my spells, and I just absolutely destroyed them. Felt kind of bad. I could tell they felt kind of bad about it. And I was quick to be like, the cards I'm killing you with are also in Regular Cube. It's just Skin Render. Skin Render is also in Regular Cube.
Just
it's
Skin
fine.
Render. Familiar, beloved Skin Render. We all know him.
I mean, I do think it is one of the better cards in my deck, and it is in both cubes, so that is notable. But then I was like, crap, maybe I was wrong.
Maybe you'd made a mistake.
Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Sacred Geometry is just a lot more powerful, because I didn't think my deck was incredible. I thought it was, a solid control deck, maybe a 2-1 in Sacred Geometry if I was playing in pod. First match wasn't close to being close against a good player in our play group. And I was like, maybe this was a horrible mistake, and everybody in the Regular Cube pod is going to have a horrible night and just get smoked, and I will be wrong about my, 60-40 guess in terms of, match win percentage.
Do you want me to tell you where I was at a similar time?
Yeah.
Because my draft felt, and I thought the gimmick was okay, nobody's going to be hate drafting. We'll kind of be it'll be a nice, polite draft. We'll end up with decks we're happy with.
Did you really expect, people's draft tendencies to change? I did not.
I don't know. I just thought the draft was going to go easy because that wasn't the conceit of the night. The conceit of the night was the cross-pod nature of things, and my draft went not great. It felt like kind of not quite a train wreck, but I ended up splitting across 3 colors in a heroic deck, and then discovered the person immediately to my right was also in the same colors and cutting me for not exactly the same cards, but a lot of things that I would kind of thought would wheel, almost wheeled in our 10-player pod.
Almost.
They
made it to the one player
Max
to the right
took
of you.
them, which was kind of disappointing. So I was like, okay, well, this experiment, at least for my matches, feels like kind of a bust because I don't even feel like I'm going into it with a representative deck. And then my first opponent, their first play of the game was Goblin Bombardment, and I'm looking at 3 1-toughness creatures, either in play or in my hand, and I'm like, well, I just played the Turbo Goblins deck in Sacred Geometry a couple weeks ago. I know what Goblin Bombardment can do, and I think this is kind of a lost game on turn 2.
You did end up losing that match.
I did lose that match, but I did win a game. Mm-hmm. I got to cheese them out with just a whole bunch of combat tricks on a Illuminator Virtuoso, which was great. Fun to play with that card as always. But they did get me in the end.
You're feeling kind of similar to the way I'm feeling, but maybe for different reasons. You're thinking your deck is bad, you're going to have a bad night, and it's not even necessarily representative. I'm thinking, crap, is my deck too good? Is this just going to be, a trouncing on behalf of Sacred Geometry? Then you and I played, and I would say you cheesed me in 2 games. Did you say you cheesed me in 2 games?
Yeah, that's fair. Push-pull was notable. I would say that I was able to consistently keep doing damage to you in your Esper control deck. You weren't able to remove all of my threats at once, so I was lowering your life total and putting you in a position where you're at 3 life, and I have push-pull in my deck somewhere that I'm eventually going to be able to get you. And Gingerbrute also did a lot of work in putting in some unblockable damage.
Turns out unblockable creatures, hard to block.
I did enjoy our game where you killed all my threats, and I was like, okay, well, I have nothing in hand. Deck, just give me a Gingerbrute, and Gingerbrute off the top to get you down to 2, and then drawing the push-pull.
Yeah, I mean,
to
that
close
didn't
out the
actually
game.
matter. The Gingerbrute didn't actually matter in that game.
It mattered emotionally. It was a fun moment.
Because to be clear, I think I wiped the board and then also followed up with a threat in the same turn.
I think the threat was next turn in the skin render that also then killed the Gingerbrute.
That then also happened. The reason you said Gingerbrute specifically is...
Oh, right, because you had a blocker.
Because
right.
I had a blocker and you wanted something that could get past the blocker.
You're right.
Yeah, and you won those games, and I was like, well, that was interesting. I felt like my deck was better than yours, to be honest. But also, I felt like I did not have the right suite of interaction for what your deck was doing. Out of the sideboard, I did bring in a Duress, and I had a Thoughtseize main deck. And in terms of like instant speed ways to interact with creatures, I had Last Gasp and Elspeth's Smite. All of which I think, Thoughtseize aside, all of which are cards that are like perfectly fine in the regular cube / in the regular cube. Like Last Gasp would be fine there. It's worse than some things you're playing, I would argue, in some ways. But I didn't have enough instant speed ways to deal with creatures, and you had all these combat tricks. I had a lot of sorcery speed ways to deal with creatures. I had a control magic, I had 2 board wipes, I had a skin render, I had ways to flicker my skin render, but none of it had instant speed, and so I was just very oftentimes in combat at the mercy of like, I sure hope you don't have one of the 6 combat tricks in your deck, and then just got by them.
You think I only had 6?
The other notable thing about this matchup was that in one of our games, you just played a Voice of Resurgence on 2, and
yes,
that was a card that I was like, that's incredibly good against my, like, I ended up having to main phase a Mystical Teachings to get a Last Gasp to then main phase a Last Gasp the next turn to deal with the stupid frickin' Voice of Resurgence.
Elemental tokens.
Just the voice itself, and having to main phase a Mystical Teachings felt very bad, and I was quick to point out all night when I was like, well, that's a card that's too good for Sacred Geometry. I'd never play that over there. And it's actually like, it's a good example of like how subtle context shifts, I think, make cards perform in different ways that maybe we even, more differently than we even expected, perhaps.
I think Voice of Resurgence is, to me, the clearest example of the night, and what is the thing that gets instant sorcery from your opponents?
Direfleet Daredevil.
Is Direfleet Daredevil. Those 2 cards, I think, stood out as, like, really highlighting how that context matters, because, honestly, Voice of Resurgence is a card that I put into the regular cube years ago and was like, well, this is a card that's kind of iconic. It's like known to people who played Modern in a certain era, so it has a little bit of like nostalgia value, but it's probably too powerful. It'll probably get cut. And then it's just been kind of fine. Like the card gets played, it does what it does, but it doesn't like take over games in any way. It felt so good in these matches because I think that Sacred Geometry just has
me, yeah.
So we're net zero. It felt neutral overall, but
in my Brainstorm Serum Visions preordained deck, I was like, cool. That doesn't actually punish those, actually. That's just cover like counterspells. Really
counterspells. And yeah, it's like interesting that the blue decks in regular cube are very much about just like still playing to the board, and you're doing ninja stuff and putting curiosity on your creatures, stuff like that. So it just doesn't punish blue decks in the same way. And that was a really interesting thing to feel. And I felt it in both directions. There were cards like Luminarch Aspirant that also was very briefly in the regular cube and got cut very quickly because I think the removal density and like there's a lot of small removal in regular cube. So if you weren't able to answer it immediately, it felt like it just took the game completely on its own. So it was funny to see cards in both directions that felt like wouldn't fit in the respective cube, but did make sense in the cube they were in.
So you got me in a match where I was like, okay, well, I kind of feel like I just didn't have quite the right interaction for combat tricks, and also you top-decked push-pull and killed me with pull, and then had this, like, Voice of Resurgence that, would be really out of place in Sacred Geometry for, like, unique token and, like, complexity reasons. And also just on power level was like, yeah, this is insane against my deck, which is a much more committed, like, control deck than you can really draft in the regular cube, because in the regular cube, everyone's kind of doing creature stuff. And so there, it doesn't matter as much. So I was like, okay, lost to Anthony. I still think my deck is quite strong. Feel like that match was maybe an anomaly. And then I get paired up against Max, who was the person that was to your right drafting essentially the same deck. He was just Gruul. No white in his deck, right?
Yeah, he was Gruul, and he was drafting like a bigger, more just like value-oriented, here's my Bloodbraid Elf and my Giant Hydra, where my curve stopped at 3, and I was playing 3 colors, and like much more committed to trying to stack up a bunch of combat tricks.
Max mulled 5 in our first game, and I was like, all right, well, this probably won't even be a game. Like, I was staring at a hand with like a couple removal spells and like, a good card draw spell and all mana fixing I needed. And then Max just beat me on a mull to 5 by having
Incredible.
like the perfect spells in sequence. I, on turn 5 played out my Archangel of Thune, which is a card that you have said many times, like would be just utterly insane in the regular cube, like unstoppable. And my Archangel of Thune did not help me at all most of the night. Like, in some cases it was a interchangeable 5-mana finisher where it's like, yep, this is going to end the game the way that any 5-mana card that you can't answer will win the game. But it was far from overpowered, and I played it on a board where he had Heartfire Immolator and the red-green guy that makes red-green on ATB, the hybrid one.
Burning Tree Emissary,
which is another card which is insane. Burning Tree Emissary is crazy. So he had a board of Burning Tree Emissary, Heartfire Immolator. I might have had some dinky creature, and I also played out my Archangel of Thune on 5, and then he had Domri's Ambush for Exaxes with the Heartfire Immolator, with the Prowess trigger and the +1/+1 counter to kill the Archangel of Thune, which was not cool. And I lost on Almodo 5, and then he mulled to 6, and I lost again on the play this time, just by him curving out in a way that my deck could not deal with. And yeah, I wiped the board, and then he played Bloodbraid Elf, and then killed me after that, and I was like, that's also insane.
It's a pretty good thing to do after a board wipe.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, well, that's 2 losses down. Maybe this deck is not as good as I thought. Or again, it was like another situation where if I had the option to hold up instant speed interaction, would I have played the Archangel on 5, or would I have done something else? I don't know, but he had the perfect cards that just answered my stuff all on time. And I think I did win one game against you with Archangel of Thune. That you just
did, yeah.
You were also stuck on 2 lands, so I don't think we can really say that Archangel of Thune carried that game as much as you didn't have any lands to play your spells. And then my 4th match, because we were just playing as many matches as we could, we had time for a 4th match. All these matches were over very quickly, I should say. These first 3 of mine, like it was probably still not even 8:45 or 8:30 or something. I sit down to play Michael, who I knew from just, walking around seeing what people were doing, was playing a control deck as well. And I was like, okay, the control mirror.
That's where you're going to shine.
Is maybe a place where, like, I will have an advantage for having, like, different card quality than Michael has. You, I think, as we agreed in our pre-discussion, the regular cube, I think, is a little more synergistic, has a little higher complexity, but also has a narrower power level band. You don't have, like, as many individual power outliers. Meanwhile, my deck has Control Magic and Day of Judgment in it, and, cantrips that you deem to be much too good for, your cube in the form of like Preordain, and then Archangel of Thune in the top end. You're no longer on Restoration Angel, right? You were for a very long time, but you're no longer on Restoration Angel.
I believe that is correct, yeah.
But like I had Restoration Angel Skin Render in my deck, which was a crazy combination that could absolutely end things. And then I had Sphinx's Revelation, which is like a classic control mirror breaker that I thought would really benefit me in this matchup. I forget the order of things. I remember how all 3 games went. I just don't remember the order. I think I won the first game. I know we went to game 3. Really long games in both circumstances, the first and second game.
Was the first game where you countered an ephemerate targeting a token?
No,
because that was very funny.
Never an ephemerate targeting a token that I countered.
There sure was. You were attacking with Archangel of Thune. You were at 3, and so Michael needed the life gain, so he blocked with a Thopter token,
you are totally
and then
right.
ephemerated it to try to make the life gain, which was a very cool move.
To be clear, the important thing about that was that the counterspell was Absorb, so I was gaining life from the Absorb anyway.
Well, the other important thing was he had the Creeping Tar Pit, so if you weren't able to gain the life from the attack or the Absorb, which I don't know if he knew that, he was going to be able to get you on the crackback with the
You're right.
Creeping Tar Pit.
That was a total crazy sequence. These were like really crazy games where the cards that really mattered in my deck were Sphinx's Revelation, certainly. I had Phyrexian Arena, which we'll get to. I didn't play it in the first 2 games. I just never drew it. But I felt like that would be a really good card in the matchup because Michael was not pressuring my life total, and it would be, largely about card advantage. I had a couple of hand hate cards, which were obviously really good and also gave me critical information to like, in our first game, I thought seized him on turn 2 or 3 and saw a Quench, and then played around Quenched the entire rest of the game. Was just like, I'm just going to, which at some point I'm like, is this even right anymore? Like, I don't even know, like, he's keeping 2 mana up to hold up the Quench. He never tapped out of the Quench, but I also kept 2 mana up to never open myself up to Quench. And it's like at some point, I don't know, but I remember I did win the first game. That was the game where there was the counterspell on the ephemerated token because I needed the life gain. Really close, cool matchup that basically came down to like me recurring my finishers over and over again. And my best finisher was Archangel of Thune. Sometimes I was recurring other ones, but it was mostly Archangel of Thune, and I had Reanimate in my deck for it, which was a really cool tension, just to, note as a cube designer, like paying the 5 life to put it in play mattered a lot. Like I was very often at a kind of low life total, and I was like, I need you to now deal combat damage to regain some of that life loss from the Reanimate. Like that is essential. I also had a Graceful Restoration, which can bring back Archangel with a +1/+1 counter on it, or bring back 2 of my smaller things. And so in a couple of games, I was like, Archangel, answered. Second Archangel, answered. Third Archangel? And that was actually the game that I won, where it was like, third Archangel, and now I'm also going to have to absorb your Ephemerate so that you don't stifle my lifelink, because if you then don't play a spell before you go to combat next turn, I will never have something to absorb and gain 3 life from. And so even though I have this gain life counterspell in my hand, you'll just kill me with Creeping Tar Pit unless
Well, you could have cast your own spell and countered it.
If I had an instant, I would have done that for sure, but I did not have that either. Really interesting game. Second game was similarly interesting. And so the cards that really mattered in Michael's deck, the Ephemerate was very annoying, for sure. He had Ephemerate, Baleful Strix, and a couple of other creatures with ETBs that mattered. Shipwreck Dowser, Ephemerate was kind of like his win con, his late game win condition.
That is kind of cool. I appreciate that.
Shipwreck Dowser and the Thopter Engineer, right, is the one that you...
Thopter Mechanic.
Thopter Mechanic, that one. There was a lot of turns where I had a Wall of Omens, and Michael knew I had a Last Gasp in hand, and he had a Thopter Mechanic that was on 3 toughness, but I also knew that he had a Radical Idea in his graveyard. I'm sorry, it wasn't Last Gasp. I had the one that Elspeth Smite, specifically only in combat. And so there was this stupid, detente where he attacks and I have a removal spell for it, but I can't use it because then he'll just flashback Radical Idea and grow it out of removal spell range.
It's neither player is rewarded by taking the first action in that situation.
Right, but I just got beat
so
down
you're
with
just
this thing.
I guess I just take 3.
I guess I just keep taking damage. Eventually I did force him to do it, and then I wiped the board, which was the right sequence eventually. Anyway, he got there in that game largely on the back of the prowess on Shipwrecked Dowser and the ability to grow Thopter Mechanic at instant speed, making Elspeth Smite and Last Gasp not effective answers for those cards. That was sort of the way that worked. And again, I sort of felt okay, my deck is I think pretty good, but I'm lacking a murder. Or, even a fell, just a way to remove a single creature. I have these board wipes, I have Skin Render, I have Last Gasp, I have Elspeth Smite. All those things care about 3 toughness except for the board wipes.
Interesting. So the prowess also is relevant in those similar situations.
Exactly. So for the exact same reasons. I couldn't kill the Shipwreck Dowser because I knew he had spells, or he had, honestly, it was a lot of Radical Idea in the graveyard, which was especially annoying because I'm that card sucks.
I love that.
It's not even a good card, but it's face up in the graveyard now, and it's this weird game of do I force him to use it? I really wish I had both my removal spells so I could force him to use it, then remove it again in response. But that was how I won the second game, was basically the sort of stickiness of those 2 threats. And the thing I felt in that game too was I'm worried about maybe just Michael having enough removal spells in his deck, because he had a lot of removal as a control deck. And this is where I felt the other thing I hadn't considered about this experiment, which was it'd be not impossible, but much less likely or more difficult for me to come up against a deck like Michael's within a pod of Sacred Geometry, because I was taking all those cards in my colors, and there was another control deck at the table, but it was pretty different. But just the control mirror that we were playing was especially pronounced in that we were coming from completely different pods. So we didn't draft at the same table. We had access to completely different pools of cards, and that meant that the mirror felt different than it usually feels in this cube, where if you end up in the blue control mirror, it's usually your decks are pretty different. Meanwhile, Michael and my decks were very similar, just with slight textural changes, slight differences in density of interaction or types of interaction. I think I had more card advantage and Michael had more removal. And what happened in the third game is I did have Phyrexian Arena on 3, which I was really excited about. I was this would be great. This would give me tons of card advantage. I can just go 1 for 1 on everything and then eventually go over the top. And I just basically decked myself. Technically Michael killed me the turn before I decked myself, but that was only because
That's an important distinction.
Well, but it was only because I had to play really aggressively in the last couple turns. I for sure could not have died. I could have blocked profitably and just decked myself if I had chosen to go that way. But instead I had to play this narrow out of I'm going to die in a couple turns to decking, so I have to just swing all in and hope that I can sneak some damage by and maybe Michael makes a bad block or something. So I basically just decked myself because he removed Archangel of Thune 3 times, and my small creatures, some of them traded in combat. And then I was just left with nothing else to win the game with. And I had sided in Talrin's Invocation, which was
that makes the 2 flyers.
Yeah, the second to last card in my deck, which I think would have made a huge difference if I had drawn that earlier, because 2/2 flyers would have been a big game changer for my clock, certainly. And that's just variance, that just happened to be one of the bottom cards in my deck. But I lost that match too, thus making me 1-3 with what I thought was a pretty solid control deck. And I started sort of asking around, and it seemed like most of the players I talked to on either side were had pretty extreme records.
Hope you're having a good day. I was thinking about the Sacred Geometry versus regular cube cross-pod battle royale. It was a lot of fun, obviously, first and foremost, but kind of second, thinking about it, it was just at the beginning there was kind of this cool pressure, this cool team alliance, especially on the regular cube side, where I felt we kind of knew that it was going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, which the results came out that actually ended up not being as true as we thought. But, it just kind of felt this pressure of man, I've got to look for these little edges, these maybe misplays that my opponents make, or anything that I can find to get as much value out of my cards. Something that's kind of cool is, you really see that designers are building cards to address their threats. So I had touched the Spirit Realm, notably in my deck, and in a cube where flicker matters and, there are other things to gain from it, can be really, really helpful, but you start to really notice, like, man, this whole artifact and creature clause is really, really tough when you look at a Goblin Bombardment or a Phyrexian Arena. And then another thing I thought was cool is just like, kind of opened up the meta a little bit. You kind of know after you've played the cubes a little bit what decks you're going to go against. And, you kind of got to see, all right, I'm going against a different style of red-white aggro deck that Cameron specifically was playing that I wouldn't see in the regular cube. Or, man, Derek is playing a really cool Dimir control deck that doesn't really exist in regular cube. And how do these decks play against each other?
You ended up 2-2.
Yeah, so I played against the red-white goblin deck, and then I played against your control deck. So I was 1-1 at that point. My third match played much more like I expected. My opponent was playing black-white, and they had the Hero of Blade Hold and Grafted War Gear, a bunch of just like really powerful cards that just felt like were really outclassing mine. And that happened.
And you lost.
I could not beat Hero of Blade Hold. One game, he played Healer's Hawk, is that right? It's a lifelink and first strike on turn one, and then put
It's lifelink and flying.
Oh, doesn't it have
You're
first
thinking
strike?
of, there's another hawk that's flying and first strike. That's a 1/1 for 1.
Oh, but it's not in this cube.
It's not in this cube.
Interesting. Well, regardless, he played that on turn one, put a Bone Splitter on it, and I was like, well, I have my removal spell that I really thought I was going to use on Hero of Blade Hold, but this is going to be a 6-point life swing for the next 4 to 5 turns because I don't have another way to deal with it. So I spent my removal spell and then just had no way to
Then
deal
got
with
Hero
Hero
Blade
when it finally happened.
Yeah, that player did mention, he was like, yeah, Hero of Blade Hold ended a lot of games, but it was only because I made them use their removal on other stuff most of the
Right,
time.
yeah.
And I will say this, obviously, I've talked a lot about my feelings about life gain on this podcast. Sacred Geometry is the one cube where I'm like most friendly to life gain because I want it to be about like Magic's iconic effects and color pie. And like, yeah, I think some life gain is like pretty essential to like what white is, and figuring out a way to make that fit and work and meet my sort of design goals was part of the challenge of designing the cube, and remains part of the challenge. The number of times that Healer's Hawk ends up with a huge equipment on it, I feel like it happens every draft, basically. Like, that is just what that card does.
I mean, I think that's what players are, like, feel like they're supposed to do with it.
I think there's like 5 equipment in the whole list. Like, there's not even that many, and yet every single time I see Healer's Hawk in play, it's got 2 equipment on it, and it's like the entire game is about stupid Healer's Hawk.
Constantly look at this bird with a bunch of swords. Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, and I honestly feel like I'm going to cut some of the equipment or something, because I really like Healer's Hawk still. The way I've sort of landed on what I want life gain to be in that cube is I want it to be like a very small thing. Like, I like gaining 1 life a turn, for example, that you like do off a unaugmented Healer's Hawk, and then making that matter somehow with something like Archangel of Thune or Exemplar of Light or maybe a Johnny's Pride Mate. Like, that is kind of the right amount of life gain. What I don't like is like 4, 6, 7, point life swings. Like, those are just, I think, really awful and hard to deal with. So I feel like it shouldn't happen as much as it does. And yet Hero's Hawk is always just swinging some big giant sword.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. You were talking about how there's a bigger sort of power level delta, which means some of your opponents will also have some stinkers if you're playing against these Sacred Geometry decks. But this deck in particular, it's like, okay, half these cards are actually in both cubes. We've got Cathar Commando and Seasoned Hollow Blade and Ancestral Blade.
Healer's Hawk is supposed to be the stinker.
It's supposed to be the stinker. It was not. But then, on the other hand, he also has Swords to Plowshares and Sundial, just a 2-mana 3/3, and obviously the top end was hard to deal with. So, yeah, I don't know. This just feels like such a, like, same deck that you could draft in both cubes, but this one was just totally so much more powerful in terms of, like, individual card quality.
Which definitely did happen a couple of times throughout the night where, like, players reported, like, yeah, my opponent's cards were just better than mine. I got, better cubed. And that did come up quite a bit. We also should spoil the end records of the cubes across all the players was 16 to 15, right?
16 to 14.
16 to 14,
that's how
sorry.
math works. Yeah, I did play a 4th round as well, and won. This was a player who was, I think, coming back to Magic after a long time, and their deck was very slow and didn't have a very specific strategy, I don't think. So I did win, but also I didn't feel great about that matchup, to be honest.
You didn't feel great just because you stomped them.
Well, I didn't even stomp them is the thing. It's like they had Lightning Bolt and a Braid, killed my first 2 threats, and then I was looking at combat tricks and removal spells for creatures they never played, and so we just drew cards, played lands, and
Until
passed
you
the turn
drew
back and
push
forth
pull.
until I finally drew something. Yeah.
But yeah, we ended up 16-14, which is even closer than I expected. Closer than 60-40.
One match difference. If one match had gone the other way, we would have been evenly tied.
I mean, obviously, this is completely anecdotal, right? I don't know if this is coming up before or after our episode about the data analysis where we talked about the data collected from drafts on 100 ornithopters, but like, obviously, this is one draft's worth of experience. I think what this does tell me, talking to people in the cubes and playing in 4 of the matches myself, is that, like, I do still think, obviously, that Sacred Geometry has better cards, and I think when the matchup cares about just who's got the better cards, the Sacred Geometry decks are going to be favored, right? And that's sort of what you're alluding to with, like, you know, the white deck you played against, where you're like, yeah, this is like a regular cube deck, but just juiced. Where decks struggled, where control decks in both pods struggled, for the most part. I think Derek had the best record with any control deck. But for the most part, if you were playing, like, a reactive strategy in either pod, you struggled quite a bit. And I think it's just because the subtle differences mattered quite a bit in terms of, like, yeah, you've just got Voice of Resurgence, and like, that just makes my deck look really bad. And those sort of subtle differences mattered quite a lot for the controlling decks, which means that I think a lot of the matchups just are not about card quality. They're about, like, how specific things line up more than they are about, like, who's got the better cards. And so if you end up in a matchup about card quality, then yeah, you're going to feel like, well, you have better cards, they just got better carded. But a lot of matchups are not really about card quality. They're about, like, how my threats line up with your answers or vice versa. And then it's kind of a toss-up in terms of, like, which deck wins. And it kind of tells me that, like, I mean, we knew this to be true, but, like, obviously power level is not like a linear scale with, like, you know, a low end and a high end, and everything sort of falls somewhere on this line in between. It's multi-dimensional, and there are certainly ways in which the regular cube is much more powerful than Sacred Geometry. Like, Illuminator Virtuoso is crazy. The combat trick you have that gives 2 things +2/+0 and haste and something else.
And also has Convoke.
Prepare to Fight is crazy.
Prepare to Fight was great.
Those cards are better in a lot of senses than the cards in Sacred Geometry. And I think one of my takeaways is, like, I think you have often felt like, well, these really powerful cards are, like, too good for regular cube. Like, you know, you can't play Day of Judgment or Lightning Bolt here because they would just be too good. And really what it felt like is just like, I mean, you're playing cards that are conditionally much better than those cards. And actually, I was thinking while we were playing about a thing we talked about ages ago. I remember us talking on the podcast years ago about how Dreadhorde Arcanist is better in regular cube than it is in Bud Magic Cube. And I don't mean relatively better. I don't mean that, like, it is a better card here because the rest of the cards are weaker, therefore it's just, like, better. I mean that, like, you have a bunch of combat tricks. So, like, the card does objectively much more powerful things in regular cube.
It does the thing that when you first read the card, you think it's all about, which is make it bigger and then cast big spells from the graveyard. At least that's what I thought when I first saw it.
Yeah, whereas in Bud Magic Cube, it mostly just casts one of the many 1-mana spells that are in your graveyard, which I have a lot of powerful 1-mana spells, so it's still really powerful there. But, like, objectively, if you put them both on the battlefield and you, like, let them do their thing, like, Dreadhorde Arcanist is a better card in regular cube than it is in Bud Magic Cube most of the time, because you get to do, like, really broken stuff. I think the idea that, like, you're not playing those cards because they're too powerful is, like, just not the case. You're just not playing them because it's not the power you want. You want the power to be Prepare to Fight, Illuminator Virtuoso, Dreadhorde Arcanist, combat tricks.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point about, like, Lightning Bolt specifically, I don't think Lightning Bolt would be too powerful. Like, that's honestly just kind of an aesthetic holdover that, like, regular cube is about not the best cards.
Right.
It's a tier lower.
So you don't get Lightning Bolt and Counterspell.
Right. If I swapped it in, it would be fine. And those were not the cards that, like, really felt like the difference. Like, when my opponents had just actual counterspell, it's like, okay, that's good. Quench would have also done the same job in this context. It was really the Hero of Blade holds or, like, Consecrated Sphinx. And, like, as soon as that hits the table, it's like, oh, I guess this game is over now because I didn't have a counterspell. Yeah, I mean, in that aspect, like, I think really highlighted to me, I felt like I got a better sense of what these cubes were about. And to your point, when I have a turn 3 or turn 4 where I play Illuminator Virtuoso and then 2 combat tricks and I'm attacking for 14, that is just a thing you can't really do in Sacred Geometry. And it's sort of like, okay, I guess that kind of synergistic thing is really something that is unique to regular cube and is kind of what it is about. And on the other hand, seeing Sacred Geometry decks that are, I'm just going to curve a pretty solid 2 into a 3 into a 4, and then eventually cast Consecrated Sphinx and just win with that. Like, that was what those decks felt like they were about.
Which is funny because, like, I really don't feel like that is how that cube feels in isolation.
Right, yeah.
Like, something I feel like I have learned from playing that cube a bunch, and it's the cube I've played the most over the past 8-9 months or whatever since I started playing with it, because it's by far the Magic I most enjoy playing. is that it's almost never that you play Archangel Thune and the game is over. You play Consecrated Sphinx and the game is over. You play, Twin Flame Tyrant or whatever and the game is over.
No, they take like 2 turns to win.
No, I mean, very oftentimes they just get answered, or like your opponent is like, which is also true with regular cube. Again, I played Archangel Thune probably 10 times last night, and I think 3 times it stuck. And yeah, it won the games where it stuck, but like 70% of the time, it ate a removal spell that was cheaper than the 5 mana I spent on the Archangel of Thune, which is like why people don't play Baneslayer Angels and really powerful cubes, because I got like tempoed basically by like having my big threat removed by a cheap removal spell. Consecrated Sphinx is one where like I side that card out against aggro decks. I'm like, this is a liability. Like it's 6 mana and I'm not going to need to like win on card advantage. And so by the time I'm playing this, it's like a 6 mana wall. Like it's okay blocker, but it's not even that good of a blocker for 6 mana. And I often will just play it. And then my opponent untaps, they draw a card. I draw 2 and then I die. Like they just attack right past it and kill me.
But you did get to draw 2 cards. So that's like, I don't know, pretty good trade-off.
I couldn't tell how much of the like saltiness is not the right word for it. Maybe the feel bads about players feeling like, oh, you just have better cards because you were in like the better cube, which there was certainly that feeling was prevalent or like was happening last night. I couldn't tell how much of that was like kind of manufactured because you just know you're playing across pod, and so you have that excuse, like it just feels like it's unfair because you didn't have that in your draft. Meanwhile, if you were within the same pod, like the exact same thing could have happened to you. You could have lost to a Hero of Bladehold, but you wouldn't have felt like, oh, Hero of Bladehold is just so much better. You would have been like, oh, that's fine because I also have a powerful card in my deck. Or like I couldn't get a sense of like how much of it was just this is because we're playing cross pod, therefore people are like extra likely to feel bad about deltas and card quality versus the actual removal suite and the removal in the regular cube being different than Sacred Geometry, such that those things were actually harder to answer. I don't know. I feel like my impression is that you play almost as much removal as I do. I think it's different texturally. You like, for example, you like O-rings. I don't like O-rings. So like you have more O-ring effects. I have more just kind of like regular removal, I guess.
I do love it. Just being able to cheese somebody out with a disenchant, that's what Magic is about, right?
Maybe for you. Yeah, I absolutely destroyed, I think it was Emma, I played Archangel of Thune. She played Banisher Priest. Is that the one you have?
Or Fiend Hunter.
Fiend Hunter. One of the Banisher Priest style creatures to exile it. And then I cast Time Wipe, picking up my 3 mana 2/1 flyer at ETB, gain a life, draw a card, Angel, and then destroying Fiend Hunter, which then brought Archangel back into play, and then played the Angel again, and then gained a life, and then put 2 plus counters on them, and it was like...
That seems pretty good.
Yeah, like there, the fact that the Fiend Hunter wasn't just a murder made the entire difference. Like the game was completely over because of that, and if it had been a murder, then the game would have continued, and we would have done more magic. So there's differences in texture, but I don't get the sense there's differences in density, because again, like Michael's control deck had more removal than mine did, and that's why I decked myself effectively, because I didn't have enough ways to protect my threats or recur them in a really long game. I don't know if it's like that textural difference actually really does make Hero of Bladehold and Luminarch Aspirant that much better, or if it was just that people were like sensitive to differences in card quality because of the nature of the experiment.
Do you think people were salty overall? I mean, I would
not say salty, but I did definitely have people that were just kind of like, yep, experiment done. Yep. Those cards are better than mine, so I guess cool experiment. Like,
yeah.
Like that was kind of the vibe I got, and not negative at all. Just like, here's the results of your experiment. My deck is bad because I lost. But again,
but ultimately we were almost tied. It was almost equal, which is not my expectation. I thought we were going to be much more lopsided. My sort of hypotheses about that are, Magic is a game with a lot of variance, and
true.
Definitely sometimes somebody had better cards but just didn't draw them, or didn't draw the mana to cast them, or mulled to 5. So like I think that variance it makes Magic honestly a kind of forgiving game in some ways. Like players will still win and lose sometimes. It's not like chess where the better player always will win. We play with a very mixed group. We had some players that Michael just won CubeCon DMV a couple weeks ago, and we had somebody who was coming back to Magic after not playing for a couple years. Like that skill difference also makes a difference. So like I think that the actual cards you're playing with maybe matters less than we want to think.
And I was thinking about that too. We had that one player in our pod that was definitely like, they ended up going 0-3 and they kind of like didn't really know how to navigate things, or they were coming back to the game from a long time away, and that certainly affects things. But I also had the thought of like, all of our decks are probably better because this person didn't know how to draft perfectly and like was passing cards that were like stronger than they should have passed, and so it's like, okay, maybe this person kind of tanked our win rate a little bit, but also made everyone's deck better. So like our win rate should be better because they were like passing cards they shouldn't have passed or whatever, which did happen. I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. The thing that's more important to me is like, I played 4 matches. My win was the only one that didn't feel close. That was where it just felt like you played your cards. My cards were way better. And again, I got you with Skin Render Restoration Angel, which was a specific combo that was in the regular cube for years. So it's not like that's completely out of bounds for what the regular cube is.
And Ephemerate is currently in the regular cube, so you can do even worse than that, actually.
Ephemerate's in the regular cube, and that's a card I would never touch with a 1,000-foot pole. So it's not like I was beating you with something that is like out of bounds for the regular cube. It just happens to be that I had it in my hand. My other 3 matches were incredibly close. And like that to me is like so much more like, yes, Magic is a game of variance, but like we were there, we played the games. Like you would know if the games were lost to variance. And in the case of Max, he mulled to 5 and then mulled to 6 with what I think are cards from a worse cube and then beat me twice pretty handily. And it's like, all right, that's not variance because I kept 7 both times and like didn't stumble or anything, and I just didn't have the right answers at the right moment. So that to me says that like ultimately the thing I felt most was this whole like power level is not a linear spectrum. It is like,
right, yeah,
there's different ways in which these things can be powerful. And yeah, I think Sacred Geometry caters to the like, my deck is powerful because my plan is broadly cohesive. Either I'm going fast, I'm going slow, or I'm going somewhere in between, and I have like a decent curve. Cards in the regular cube are powerful because they are combined in synergistic ways. You play cards with like really high ceilings and like more middling floors, whereas I don't play cards with like awful floors, generally speaking. I play cards with like pretty mid ceilings mostly, except for the really, power outlier ones.
Except for the ones that don't fit that description.
Like my power outliers are Luminarch Aspirant, not Illuminated Virtuoso. And Luminarch Aspirant is the better card, probably, if you were to try and, condense the power level to a linear spectrum, but it's also doing the one thing and it doesn't scale, it doesn't go crazy. It's just like maybe you get to put the counter on something, maybe you get to put the counter on a Healer's Hawk, and then you're like really doing it, but Illuminated Virtuoso attacks you for 14 the next turn. And so it's like that small distinction, because I saw people complain about Luminarch Aspirant, and it's like, okay, but Anthony's over here crushing people with Luminarch Virtuoso, so it's like that little comparison at that exact point, at that white 2-drop slot, I think is a concise way to describe the dynamic that was present across all of the matches, basically, which was like, it's not that one's better or worse, it's that they're different. And the ways in which they're different lines up differently and like creates different outcomes depending on just how decks happen to line up against each other.
So are you gonna do anything different based on this experiment? In life, in your cube design?
I don't need to redo this experiment anytime soon. I'll say that. If anything, by doing this, felt like I wanted to like even further double down on the sort of like conceit of Sacred Geometry, which is ostensibly like play clean, simple, elegant cards. Don't really think that much about like how they get combined or like what the synergies are, and like let people find emergent strategies somehow. I think I kind of want to double down on that even more. And I was thinking about like just looking at cards in my cube that are on the more complicated side for my cube, and I think are like baseline for regular cube, and just being like, I kind of don't want this here. I want my like artifact creatures. Right now I have a very like slight modular theme. Our artifact sections are actually kind of similar in these cubes, and I was like, maybe I just want bottle gnomes, maybe I'm just a bottle gnomes gamer.
There are dozens of you.
Maybe I'm gonna cut Grafted Wargear for healing salve.
Yeah, I mean, Grafted Wargear felt
it's
rough.
Crazy. It's a crazy card. It's really strong.
But it's also kind of cool. I mean, to take a more sort of extreme interpretation of this, do you think there's any opportunity to like actually make this cross-pod play a design feature of, I mean, it's beyond just a cube at that point, but like, could you make 2 cubes that are very distinct but have interesting gameplay against each other? I'm not sure. Like, you wouldn't want to just be like, here's the aggro cube versus the control cube, but like leaning into the imbalance, like maybe the thing that maybe was not salty, the thing that was like a positive aspect was, I think many people in our pod who were drafting the regular cube felt like the underdogs. They were like, okay, we got something to prove in a way that like, that's a fun gameplay experience. Is there like an arch enemy mode?
I think there's tons of cool design opportunities there. And you could not even, don't think of it as 2 cubes, think of it as like a cube you divide in half, and like maybe you intentionally say, well, we're going to do 2 4-player drafts of this pod, and this is the draft format, but you're eavesdropping from like these 2 separate pools, and then those are all your opponents, right, across the table. I think there's a lot of cool opportunities for that, for sure.
It's like a pretty big ask of your players to be like, here's this like very novel experience.
I think players really don't like to feel, in general, I mean, we like definitely portrayed this as like an experiment. We like cleared it with our playgroup ahead of time. Enough people expressed interest that we knew that we weren't going to be like shoving people into a pod they didn't want to be in.
Except for the people that showed up 10 minutes late, they didn't really have a choice.
That was the minority by far. I think with that concept, players really would struggle with the idea that like you had made a decision about them before the thing even began. Like, what if I don't want to draft this seat? Yeah. What if I want to draft that seat? Then it's like, what are the politics of like how you decide who's drafting the bad guy or good guy seat or whatever you want to call it in this cube where you have like this dichotomy. But I think it's a really cool space I've never heard anybody exploring that could be really awesome and a really cool way to like, yeah, in one, side of the table you seated a bunch of like artifact themes, and on the other side you give them a bunch of disenchants, and that like you're never going to have some player with draft a bunch of disenchants that's like playing against the no artifact deck, which can happen in a regular cube in a normal cube that has these themes present. You oftentimes have cards that just don't matter in a given matchup. You can like have you can put your thumbs much more in the scales of like how much these cards are going to matter in the matchups they're playing against.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I can think of that's a little bit in this space is archenemy cubes, but the ones that I've played, you're still all drafting from the same pool of cards. It's just then somebody is designated the archenemy and gets some additional abilities during the games. If that was going to be interesting, for me, it would have to be more than just like you are pre-sorted to some degree into certain types of decks. Like there would have to be some gimmick to make that worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, like, the first thing that comes to mind for me would be like old school versus new school. Like you're playing old border cards, you're playing all cards printed, post some date, and there's like fundamental differences there. That means you could have both, both pods could have, the full range of archetypes of aggro, main, major, control. Both could have full 5 colors. But there's like distinct differences. And as the person drafting the old school cards, like, well, my cards are better in some ways and worse in other ways. And drafting the new cards, you're like, how much do I really care about individual targeted creature removal when all their creatures are going to be shit, but they're going to have the best spells ever printed? Like, that's like the first thing that comes to mind. But I think you could do a lot of really cool stuff with that. I also like the other thing that came to mind immediately for me was like, I think of the limited resources designation of a format as like Prince or Pauper, like a format where it's all about the commons and uncommons versus about the rares. And I think you could design a cool split cube where one side of the table is playing like power outliers and like big splashy spells, and the other one's playing like synergy decks, and you get to like try and beat their like big powerful card with your like little dicky synergy deck, which could be kind of fun. Someone out there should do it. The last thing I want to say, which is really more of a question for you, one of the most
a comment. Well, really more of a question.
Question and a comment. One of the most repeated things I noticed all night was that almost everybody in the regular cube was really unhappy with their mana base. You included, Max included. The only person I talked to that was pretty happy with their mana base was Michael, who was the control deck. And even he was like, yeah, I have a ton of tap lands, which didn't matter in our matchup because it was the control mirror, but I think he felt like in other matchups, the tap lands were going to disadvantage him. What do you make of that? I do think side by side, when you're like directly comparing,
it's
the
just
mana
like,
fixing is better in Sacred Geometry, but it's not like head and shoulders better.
I think a couple things. I think that when you're playing this like weird cross-pod experiment and it's just like, oh yeah, all of my opponents are just a turn ahead because they don't have any tap lands. Like that feels like a much more explicit disparity because it's not like, oh, you have this like one power outlier I have a removal spell I can deal with. It's just like your resources are more constrained, and that just feels like incidental and not that great. That's actually a great point to bring up because I think that's...
I do have a fair number of tap lands for what it's worth in Sacred Geometry. I have the full cycling duels and cycle and the regular just ETB tap cycle of dual lands, and then I have the fast lands which come in tapped on later turns of the game. It's not like Bun Magic Cube where like you can basically... I also have the Surveil duels. I have so many tap lands in that cube. It's basically just fetches and shocks that can come in untapped. So I don't think it's really that disparity. I think it's just that my mana fixing is a lot better. I have fetches and shocks and surveils and like allow people to build I think pretty powerful mana bases, and a lot of my opponents were like, I'm stuck with this like clunky whatever mana base and I feel disadvantaged by it. Again, 16-14, so you weren't that disadvantaged by it, statistically speaking, but I did hear that a lot.
I think that also this is a single data point. I don't want to draw too much from it because I was unhappy with my mana base, not because I had bad lands. I had 8 or 9 mana fixing lands, and I had even some shock lands, but I was playing like just like stretched for too many colors. I had some double pipped cards, and like I think that was just my fault as a drafter. Another player who actually went 2-0, the basics in their deck are 3 forests, 2 mountains, 2 islands, 2 plains. And I'm like, I don't really know what's going on here. Honestly, it was just a little bit of a weird draft with like 10 players, a couple people soaking up a lot of the lands, Max and I right next to each other in the same colors. I think the draft kind of just broke weird in a lot of ways, and I don't know if that aspect of it would be consistently an issue if we did this a bunch of times.
Fair enough. Can you cut the filter lands already?
I'll think about it.
Just watching you struggle with it like sucked for me as your opponent.
Yeah,
I was like,
I mean,
I don't want you to be struggling with it. They suck so bad.
Punish me for doing what I did.
You can punish that in much more elegant ways, though.
I'll think about it. Given that this came out so much closer than we expected, how far do you think could we push this? Like, if we played regular cube decks against Bun Magic cube decks, would there ever be a win for a regular
I think there would be
deck.
some wins for regular cube. I would expect like a 85-15 split in terms of match
so closer
outcome
to
there.
what I expected for this.
But yeah, I mean, people are going to get mana screwed. And, again, you're going to have like the Illuminated Virtuoso turns where it's like, okay, I'm playing a mid-range deck that just doesn't have direct answers for your threats. And so you're just going to get to do all your combat trick stuff and go crazy with it. Yeah, I think there would still be some wins. I certainly think it'd be a lot less. I don't think it would be very close at all. If we were ever to do this again, it would be even more at the peril of the participants, but just for like our morbid curiosity. Like, I'm so curious how a 100 Ornithopters deck would fare against, I don't know, a Sacred Geometry deck or a regular cube deck. Like, I think it would be incredible, but also talk about removal not being in dialogue with what's going on either side of the battlefield, right? Like, any cube that gets paired against other Ornithopters, their creature removal is basically total blanks. Any incidental disenchants they have are now the best cards in the cube, and you should be first picking them because you're playing against 100 Ornithopters. On the flip side, the 100 Ornithopters also has basically no interaction to engage with a like normal mid-range creature deck. Like, I think the fact that all the Ornithopters have flying matters so much. all of a sudden,
suddenly that matters.
All of a sudden, that's like the most important thing about the cube.
The thing that never mattered ever in that cube, except for the Colossus Hammer.
It has mattered on rare occasion, but it's not very often.
Yeah.
But I'd be kind of curious, like, what happens when you play a 100 Ornithopter deck against a deck from the Red Terror or something?
Sure, I mean, that starts to become more interesting, even just from like a narrative aspect. Like, Arch Enemy has a clear narrative of we're the underdogs, we're going to go fight the big scary monster, and playing against the like horde deck of 100 Ornithopters, and it's like, we got to go fight the birds today, and that's going to be this like weird shift. If you were to like deliberately craft a multi-cube experience.
Humans versus animals would be
Humans
kind of
versus
cool.
Animals. Seems like a tough concept, but I think there's something there.
I think there's a lot of cool stuff there. It's just a matter of if you want to do the work to make it happen, which it would be a lot of work. And the other thing is the Ornithopter control deck would be useless. Like, the control decks in that cube are really strong. They're one of the best decks in the cube, but I think they would be absolute dog water against a normal retail limited deck. Like, you'd be like, I've got my meltdown. Good luck trying to do anything. And then they're like, I played grizzly bears and just kill you and you can't do anything about it. So it'd be really weird. It'd be a really weird, like, it'd be a much more extreme shift of like, I don't think anyone would even draft what resembles a control deck knowing that they were going to play across pod. Like, why would you? These cards are just bad. Like, Vandal Blast is now a terrible card. Meltdown is a terrible card. It just hurts you. So those cards become terrible. Meanwhile, the proactive stuff I think is quite strong because the proactive decks 100 Ornithopters can be extremely proactive and fast. And now you can't block anything because they'll have flying.
Let's not do it soon.
Yeah, if we're going to do it, let's wait quite some time. Wanted to get in the habit of just mentioning the local Cube events that are coming up every few episodes so people know what's going on. If you don't check our website, which you should, regularly check luckypaper.co/community or /community/events to see what's going on. But we have Cube events coming up. At time of this podcast release, we have the Wolfpack Open Limited Festival in Somerville, Mass. We have Cube for a Cause Obscura in Brooklyn, which is already sold out, so if you don't have a ticket for that one, you're probably out of luck. We have Cube Assemblée in France, if you want to play Cube in France. Toronto, there's a Untap event. These are all the weekend of August 22nd to 23rd, basically. Very busy week. CubeCon is coming up in Madison, Wisconsin, August 26th to the 30th. And then in September, we have Fiesta Nacional del Cubo 3. And then September 12th in Hobart, Tasmania, Australia, we have Hobart Cube Champs. So that's just some ones that are coming up in the next couple months here. So if you're in any of those places, go to those Cube events. Have a great time. Change your life. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and this show is edited by Matthew. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking to microphones about it. Anthony, thanks for doing this weird experiment with me. It was exactly what I thought.
It was an experiment.
Illuminating in ways that I didn't anticipate, which is what the whole point was.
Expect the unexpected.